Greetings Battle Brothers. Today we're looking at 3 unique Blood Angels Dreadnoughts. We got the Furioso guy back here, we got the Librarian Dreadnought, we got the Death Company Dreadnought. With a mini supplement just a few weeks ago, then there's been a number of changes to these guys, so in this video we'll break down everything so you can get the most out of each of these Dreadnoughts on the battlefield. Welcome to the weekly tactics video. Thanks very much for being here. Every week on this channel we dive into some Blood Angels models, stratagems, tactics, or sometimes we compare 2 or 3. If you'd like to see more content like this on a weekly basis, then please consider subscribing. We'll start with some lore for each of the 3 dreads, then we'll jump into the main comparison points, such as points, armour saves, etc. And then finally in an extended Mathhammer section, we'll look at all the strengths and weaknesses so you can definitely make the most informed choice for your next army list. If you want to jump ahead, then the timeline, as always, will be marked appropriately. A dreadnought is death incarnate, a towering war machine whose fearsome weaponry is guided by a fallen hero buried deep within its shell. Bound into the heart of the dreadnought's sarcophagus, the pilot continues to fight against the enemies of his chapter, his redoubtable spirit undimmed by the ruin of his physical body. Should a librarian fall and be interred into a dreadnought's sarcophagus, he will typically retain his connection to the warp. The combination of such reverent psychic might, slab-like armour plates, and potent weaponry, all driven by the will of unyielding adamantium, is a terrifying combination. Librarian Dread stride into battle, wreathed in psychic lightning. With a thought, their pilots can unlock the latent fury of their battle brothers, blast their foes with searing beams of crimson energy, or boil the blood of their enemies' veins. So do librarians dominate the battlefields of both mind and body. Even dreadnought pilots are not immune to the Black Rage. To lose such an ancient warrior to the flaw is especially tragic, for all the wisdom they have accrued over the centuries of battle is swallowed up by a howling gale of rage and hate. It does, however, transfer them into an armoured battling ram that smashes headlong through the enemy's lines while bellowing with incoherent fury. The value of such potent terror weapons cannot be understated, but the price paid is a sorrowful one. In the battle's wake, the staggering, howling dreadnought must be forcibly restrained and its pilot either sent into stasis until the next battle, or given the Emperor's mercy. Furioso dreadnoughts are venerable and ancient. Their occupants in many cases are thousands of years old, veterans who've forgotten more battles than most other battle brothers have fought. They slumber deep beneath the Arx Angelicum and are roused to wrath only when the chapter has great need of their might and counsel. All Furioso dreadnoughts are living relics, reminders of the Blood Angels' glorious past, and invaluable repositories of strategic lore. So let's start by looking at general 9th edition points cost changes, etc. And if we look at the Librarian Dreadnought first, he's moved up about 7 points. He was 143 with the Stormbolt, or is now like 150, and the Stormbolt was included in his profile. I tend to like to run mine with a Meltagun because it's only 5 more points, and the Meltagun, you're going to want to be close with this guy anyway, in that he's very much a close combat focused character. So having that Meltagun now, if he's within 6 inches, you have the potential to do 8 damage. So 155 points with the Meltagun I think is the optimal way to run the Librarian Dreadnought. So he's kept the same 6-inch movement speed, however he's lost 1 weapon skill. What he's gained though is he's gained 1 regular attack, and he's also gained 1 attack with a force halberd. So no longer can you use the halberd for all the attacks, you can just use it for 1, and it's a strength 8 attack with only -2, but it will do between 4 and 6 damage. You do the rest of your attacks with your Furioso Fist, which is strength ×2, so in this case it'll be strength 12, and then with the +1 to wound, then you're generally going to wound most things on 2s with the fist. I feel like it's a fairly even trade-off losing that 1 weapon skill and gaining essentially 2 attacks. This will give you 7 attacks on the charge once it's in turn 3 in Savage Echoes. I guess until we know if we're going to get Quickening back, then maybe it is a slight nerf, because Quickening could have given us D3 attacks, so maybe they were thinking 10 attacks hitting on 2s is probably too strong, 10 attacks hitting on 3s, it's probably okay. Overall though, he also gained the Duty Eternal keyword, so basically every multi-damage weapon hit on him is reduced by 1 damage, so it makes him really strong against 2 damage weapons. And the final thing is he actually got the smokescreen keyword. I wasn't sure about this because he is a character, but no, he got the smokescreen keyword, so in the enemy phase, if they try and target him with ranged weapons, we can pay 1 CP, and that will essentially make all hit rolls against him for that turn -1 to hit. So as he's under 9 wounds, we can use Lookout Sir with him to protect him as we move across the battlefield. I think if we get some good psychic powers later this year, he's going to be a really interesting choice, and if we do, then I'll come back and revisit the Librarian Dreadnought, probably Librarian Dreadnought versus Mephiston in the next video, because that's really what we're going to want to see, in that they're both exactly 155 points now, if the Librarian Dreadnought has that Meltagun equipped. So let's look at the Death Company Dread next. He lost 2 inches to his movement speed, he gained 1 attack, Black Rage got changed a little bit so you can't fall back, and then Magna Grapple got changed as well, so you no longer get the +2 against charge on vehicles, and then finally his Insatiable keyword got removed, so he can no longer consolidate 6 inches. So overall, like, it's just I don't think the +1 attack makes up for the other things that he's lost. So in terms of weaponry, you can have a Meltagun, a Heavy Flamer and a Stormbolt, or you can have 2 of these. I usually like to run him with the Heavy Flamer and the Meltagun because he likes to be in close. You know, Heavy Flamer to shoot some infantry, Meltagun to take down some armour. Meltagun obviously get buffed, we just talked about that before, so really strong if you do get lucky and potentially do 8 damage. What sucks though is the Magna Grapple now. Before it was +2 against charge on vehicles, now it is, if you're in combat with a vehicle, roll 2d6, if you roll above their strength, the enemy cannot fall back. I mean, you can shoot in close combat now, just -1 to hit when you do that, so I really don't think there's much strength in the Magna Grapple anymore, so I'm not sure it's worth the 5 points. He does also get Duty Eternal, he does also get the Smokescreen, and then finally his Blood Talons have actually been nerfed. So before Blood Talons you were able to reroll hits and wounds, now with the Blood Talons you can only reroll the wounds, which is kind of the weaker of the two if you ask me, because Blood Talons hit with strength 10, so you're usually wounding on 2s anyway, so it's really just hitting on 3s is actually the problem with this guy. As he is part of the Death Company, he does have Black Rage keyword, so he can feel no pain on a 6, so that combined with Duty Eternal does make him basically the tankiest of the 3 Dreadnoughts. Finally we've got the Furioso, who's very similar to the Death Company Dreadnought. He just lost 1 attack, he is a little bit cheaper and obviously he doesn't have the Black Rage. He still gained the Smokescreen, the Duty Eternal, and they changed the Heavy Frag Cannon, so it used to be like 2d6, strength 6 hits at -1, 1 damage. Now it's 2d3, -1, 2 damage, and it got the Blast keyword, so I guess against larger squads of infantry, 11+, then you will get guaranteed 6 hits on them. So the weapon options, if you take the Frag Cannon, then again you can have a Heavy Flamer, the Meltagun or the Stormbolter, but you can sacrifice the Frag Cannon, and if you do that and you take 2 Fists or 2 Blood Talons, then essentially you go back and gain 1 attack, so you go up to 5 attacks, up from 4. There's really no other advantage to taking the 2 Fists. If you did that, then you would be able to do the same ornaments as the Death Company Dreadnought, and then at that point the only difference between them is the Black Rage keyword and 5 points. So as we go through, I guess you can decide if you feel like those 5 points are better spent in a Death Company Dreadnought. All 3 Dreadnoughts will explode, however it's just 3 inches and just 1 mortal wound, so it's not really a big deal if these explode around you guys, or even if they explode around the enemies anymore. So all 3 Dreadnoughts have 8 wounds, toughness 7, and the Duty Eternal, and the ability to cast Smokescreen. So in terms of survivability against small arms fire, I'd say they're fairly resilient. It's probably going to be 5s to wound them, and then they have a 3+ save. Bear in mind, any damage more than 1 is reduced by 1. The Death Company Dreadnought does get the Feel No Pain on a 6+, and he is part of the Death Company. You can pay 1 CP to improve that to 5+ for a single phase. Our Librarian Dreadnought with the character keyword is also a Psyker, so there's a few interesting things that he can do to improve his survivability. The first is his Psychic Fortress. That's a charge value of 6. If cast, it creates a 6-inch bubble. Anything within that gets a 5+ invulnerable save. The Chaplain also has access to the Biomantic Sarcophagus, but it's important to note that the Sarcophagus increases the range of powers. It doesn't buff auras, so your 6-inch bubble that we just talked about does not get buffed by his unique relic. If we want to further boost the Librarian's survivability, we could make him Hero of the Chapter or Warlord, and then we could take Iron Resolve, which would give him +1 wound, and it would also give him a 6+ Feel No Pain as well. In part 7 of the video, we're going to put all their armour to the test in the Mathhammer section. So Librarian Dreadnought is obviously a psyker, so we'll do a little bit today where we just talk about him and what he can do with the Space Marine Codex, in that it's very different to what we could do before. So as mentioned, he can take the Biomantic Sarcophagus to add 6 inches to all the psychic casts. It also lets him reroll 1 dice each turn on either a deny or a psychic power cast. Obviously he can cast 2 per turn and he can deny 1 per turn. However, with the new rules in Space Marine Codex, he could be made Chief Librarian for a hefty 35 points. If you do want to pay to make him the Chief Librarian, which does put him up to 190 points, so it's very expensive, it does give him the ability to know 1 extra power and then deny 1 extra power. So you would know 3, cast 2, deny 2, and you'd also get +1 to all psychic tests if he took the Warlord trait Psychic Mastery, which can be taken only by the Chief Librarian. So honestly, I find the Space Marine Codex psychic powers a little bit lackluster, or maybe it was just the Blood Angels ones synergised very well around our characters like Mephiston and this Librarian Dreadnought. So the choices I see really are, you could take Null Zone, which removes all invulnerable saves around him in an aura. However, it doesn't work, or it removes your own invulnerable saves, so it doesn't synergise at all with Psychic Fortress. The other 2 options are Might of Heroes, which would be nice as a self-cast. It's +1 attack, +1 strength, +1 toughness. I suppose if you put up your Psychic Fortress and then that makes him toughness 8, he'd be very difficult to wound and damage if he isn't protected by infantry, especially in the shooting phase, but also in close combat phase. And then finally is Veil of Time, where he can reroll charges, and then he has the ability to fight first in combat. So that's definitely strong. It lets you interrupt against the enemy earlier in the combat phase. Hey, if you're getting any value out of this video, I really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. Every single person that hits like supports the channel, and it really helps other Blood Angels players find and join the community. So we touched on shooting very briefly before. The Librarian Dreadnought can take a Meltagun, Heavy Flamer or Stormbolter. The other 2, if they're equipped with close combat weapons, can take a combination of 2 of the 3, and then the only other difference is the Furioso has the ability to take the Frag Cannon. The Frag Cannon is only 2d3 shots, and it is only -1. I mean, it does do 2 damage, so it could be effective against enemy infantry with 2 wounds, but it's only hitting on 3s, so you're really only going to be looking at like 3 hits, -1 save. I don't really think it's worth taking. I think these guys are designed for close combat, and I think they're also designed to not be focused on taking out infantry. So for close combat, we'll look at sort of the iconic loadouts of each of the Dreadnoughts. We start with the Librarian Dreadnought. We talked before how he gets his 4 attacks, so 5 in the charge, 6 if we're in Savage Echoes, 7 because he gets an attack with the Force Halberd. If we do put on that Psychic Power, Might of Heroes, then that potentially gives him 8 attacks, and if we want him to be some sort of like character hunter, remember we can take a Warlord trait on this guy, and there's 2 really good options for that. The first is Champion of Humanity. If he is within engagement range of an enemy character, then he gets an additional attack, so we're now looking at 8 attacks, and he also gets to add 1 to hit and wound rolls for said attacks against enemy characters. So hitting on 2s, and we're looking at basically 8 or 9 attacks potentially. So the other interesting option would be the Imperium Sword, which lets him reroll his charges, and he gets to add 1 strength and 1 attack when he is either heroically intervened or charges. So there is a very good potential to get him up to 9 attacks as we stand currently, and if you want to focus on characters, then Champion of Humanity really would let him move around the board indiscriminately, murdering enemy characters. He'd be hitting all of them on 2s, 9 attacks, he'd be wounding all of them on 2s, with the +1 wound and the Red Thirst. Both the Halberd and the Fist are -3. Obviously the Fist is a 3 damage flat, the Halberd is 4 to 6, so really you're going to be forcing people to take invulnerable saves, and then you're going to be doing a minimum of 3 damage. This guy could kick out like anywhere between, I think it would be 8 attacks at 3 damage, so that'd be 24, and then 4 to 6. So potentially he could do 30 wounds against characters in a single turn. I guess protecting him and getting him where you need him to be would be the trick, but if he is there, then I think Librarian Dreadnought is very, very strong. You just have to decide, I guess, between super offensive, like we talked about, or giving him a little bit more survivability with the Warlord trait, Iron Resolve. If we get Wings of Sanguinius and Quickening back on our supplement, then he's going to give Mythostone a real run for his money. They're both exactly 155 points on the table, so once we hit our supplement drop, I'll definitely have a video about them. But for the moment, Librarian Dreadnought is what I'm fielding, and I think there's a lot of uses that we can get out of him. The Death Company Dread with the Blood Talons, he has his 5 attacks, 6 on the charge, 7 from the Black Rage, 8 from Savage Echoes. And then he does, if he's got the Blood Talons, then he does get to reroll all his wounds. The problem is his wounds are already hitting at strength 10. The issue he's going to have is his ballistic skill is only 3, so out of those 8 attacks you can probably expect like 5 or 6. So realistically he could do 24 wounds. I think in reality what we're going to likely see is somewhere between like 12 and 18, and then it's only -2 with Blood Talons now, so if you've getting them in early in the game, then you're probably going to maybe leave the enemy quite decent saves. Maybe after turn 3 they're saving on 5s or something, but I really think he's only going to reliably do like 6 to 9 damage a turn. The Death Company Dreadnought, I suppose it will be on how much he can take or how much of a distraction, as opposed to dealing massive damage like the potential that the Librarian Dreadnought essentially has. So the Furioso Dreadnought is the cheapest of the 3, and he only has 4 attacks in close combat. It's going to be 5 in the charge and then 6 with Savage Echoes. He does have his Frag Store Cannon, so I guess with the new big guns never tire, if you survive the enemy combat and it's back in your turn, you can shoot again. I mean, the only difference between the Death Company Dreadnought and the Furioso Dreadnought that I can see is the Furioso could fall back in your turn. But like I said, with the big guns never tire, wouldn't you just shoot again anyway? And hopefully, I mean, if you're armed with an auto-hitting heavy flamer or a melty-gun, it's only -1 to hit with a melty-gun. You're still just going to hope for that hit on 4+. These guys don't get profiled. And like I said, in close range, the melty-gun can do 8 damage. So it's really hard for me to see an advantage of the Furioso over the Death Company Dreadnought. I'm just not seeing it at all, especially just for 5 points. So if you talk about leadership, leadership's only really going to come in if there's some sort of like psychic power or something that affects them via leadership. Death Company has 7, the Furioso has 8, and our Librarian Dreadnought has 9. So there's quite a few stratagems, so let's talk about them. Let's start with Librarian Dreadnought. He can become Hero of the Chapter and gain a Warlord trait. He can also play 2 CP if he dies in combat, for only in death does duty end. So if he dies before he gets to attack, pay the 2 CP and you can still attack back after the attacking model has resolved all remaining attacks. I think death and duty end on this Dreadnought is generally pretty good. Just means that if they do take him out, you know he's always going to get to attack back, and he does have the potential to inflict massive damage on one single character target, or maybe decent damage across like a squad or some sort of other monster. Wisdom of the Ancient can also be played on Librarian or the Furioso to let core units within 6 choose to reroll 1s either on hits or wounds in a single phase. All 3 Dreadnoughts get access to the smoke screen, so we talked about that before. It's 1 CP, -1 to hit with ranged weapons for the rest of the phase. The Death Company Dreadnought can use Refusal to Die to buff its 6+ Feel No Pain to 5+ for a single phase once it's chosen as a target of an attack. And then finally, Unbridled Ardour lets any of these Dreadnoughts for 3 CP, so it's been nerfed pretty hardly. It used to be 1 CP. For 3 CP, we can heroically intervene as though we were a character 6 inches. So if anyone like comes into your objective or something like that, and you really don't want them to be there for the start of your turn because you want the objective secured points, you could heroically intervene an enemy model if they're within 6 of you. So on some of these buff Dreadnoughts, that could definitely be the difference between 5 or 10 victory points, and that swing could win you or lose you the game. So now, in a similar style to last week, we're going to jump into an extended Mathhammer section, and as this is only the second week of doing it this way, it would be really nice if anyone has any suggestions or comments or feedback, if you leave them down below. I definitely read all the comments, so whatever you say will be read, and maybe we'll make some changes just so I know that you're actually getting value out of this section, and if there is any improvements, then they can be made as well. Alright, so let's get into the Mathhammer. So the 3 Dreadnoughts, we've put down the Frag Cannon, Furioso, Meltagun and the points, and then the number of attacks on the charge. The Death Company Dread with the Blood Talons, Heavy Flamer Meltagun, 140 points, and then the Force Halberd, Fist, Meltagun on the Librarian, 155 points. I've mentioned how many attacks we'll have with the Savage Echoes and Assault Doctrine as well. So this time we're going to look at Marines, the War Suits, and then also Toughness 8 armors as well. So the Furioso is 5 attacks. We're hitting on 3s. So it's 3 hits, strength 12 minus 3, 3 damage. So against infantry, we're going to do wound on 2s. So we'll do like 2 or 3 wounds. That's going to be 6 to 9 damage. So against 1 wound infantry, we've lost a lot here. Like we're just throwing away 2 damage each time. Against like a toughness 6, we're again wounding on 2s. So 2 to 3 wounds, 6 to 9 damage. So maybe against like a heavier squad, like maybe enemies almost in like Gravix armor, this could be quite good. You know, like kill 3 heavy intercessors, kill 3 aggressors in a turn. That could be decent. And then against armor, it's okay. I mean, you're still going to wound on 2s because it's essentially a power fist. 2 to 3 wounds, so probably like a max of 9 damage. Bear in mind that it's minus 3, so the enemies are likely to get a save. The Death Company Dreadnought, it's 7 attacks, hitting on 3s. Again, all this is done before Savage Echoes. So I guess with Savage Echoes, you could expect just that 1 extra attack. You get 5 hits, strength 10 minus 2, 3 damage. So against Marines, you would do about 5 wounds. Potentially, again, damage would be lost because you'd be doing 3 damage a hit. Against medium armor, again, it would be the same 5 wounds, and against the toughness 8, because of the red thirst rule, would again be doing 5 wounds. So this, to me, this says that this unit is most effective against high toughness enemies, and it's wasted damage if we start taking out infantry. So really, you'd be wanting to do like your heavy flamer into infantry, maybe last option you would charge some infantry, but you want to be going for some higher value targets. And then the Librarian Dreadnought, so it was 6 attacks hitting on 3, so essentially you're going to get 4 hits. So it's going to be strength 12 minus 3, 3 damage. And I've also mentioned here, so you're wounding infantry again on 2s, you're wounding toughness 6 on 2s, you're wounding toughness 8 on 2s, but we could get a halberd attack. It could go through here, and if the halberd does go through, then it's an additional D3. So all these are essentially 9 to 12 damage, and then at the bottom I noted that we can get +1 strength, +1 attack from Might of Heroes, and then we can also take the Champion of Humanity or Imperial Sword to get even more attacks. So this is how this guy could get up to 9 attacks, and he could have like really high levels of strength. And also with the Champion of Humanity, if he's attacking other characters, then you're hitting on 2s, so 9 attacks hitting on 2s, you're going to get a lot more than the 4 hits that we detailed up here. So we really need to make a choice with this guy. Like, are we giving him a Warlord trait for survivability, or are we just going to make him really like a strong damage dealer, and maybe protect him across the battlefield with like a large squad of, I was thinking like assault intercessors, could have a 10-man squad of assault intercessors just all round him, all within that psychic fortress bubble, so they all move 6 anyway, so they'd advance together, and then once you get into battle lines with the enemy, they can go off and kill infantry, and this guy can go after your big high damage targets. So total close combat damage then, it's very much the same right across the board, right? Like the Furioso, there's no difference against attacking lower enemies. The Death Company, it does the most damage, but we've not talked. And then the Librarian is right on the Death Company's heels, but yeah, we've not talked about the various buffs that we could cast on this Librarian. So we could buff him 2, 3 more attacks and take him into the number 1 spot. So if we talk about shooting next, so the Furioso has 2 weapons, and there's the 4 choices. He gets to choose the frag cannon as well. The Death Company gets 2 weapons, and then the Librarian gets 1. And I've sort of said my recommendation. I think on the Furioso, the frag, and then it really depends if you're going to use... The Furioso isn't going to do that much damage against armor, so maybe he's just more of an infantry killer. He will guarantee some infantry kills with that strength 12 power fist hits, auto hits from a heavy flamer, and then blast frag cannon. Maybe that's how you could run him to be effective. Death Company Dreadnought, Heavy Flamer, Melt-A-Gun. Again, the Melt-A-Gun can go into that high priority target. We already did potentially 15 wounds in close combat, so if we got a lucky Melt-A-Gun shot through and did another 8, potentially kill just about anything, 23 wounds. I mean, obviously the thing gets saves, and the rolls never go as well as that, but it's just in terms of what he could do. And then the Librarian Dreadnought, I really think Melt-A-Gun is the option here. I don't think you want your Librarian Dreadnought bogged down killing infantry. He is much, much stronger than that if used rightly with the correct psychic powers and the correct warlord buffs. So if we talk about incoming damage, then this is actually kind of brutal. So this is the incoming damage we used against a single squad last week. So now we're going to use that against the Dreadnoughts. So if someone did drop in and shoot 10 multi-meltas at the Dreadnoughts, will any of them survive? The same with 20 storm cannons, 20 grav cannons, and 24 bolter shots. So the Furioso Dreadnought, if 10 multi-melta shots hit him, or if 10 get shot at him, 7.3 hits, we get 5 wounds. He does not get a save, and the result is that very much he would take d6 minus 1 because of his duty eternal. The average on a d6 is 3.5, right? It's the middle of 1 to 6. So 3.5 minus 1, so he's going to take 5 times 2.5 wounds. He will be dead even with duty eternal against the multi-melta. Against the storm cannon, he will fare much better because the storm cannon will hit him 6 times, but the duty eternal halving all those from 2 damage to 1, he'll just take 6 wounds and survive. Grav cannons, again, doing 2 damage a time, he'll take 4 wounds and survive. And against the bolters, I mean, the bolters aren't going to wound very often, so you're really looking at just 1 will go through. So you just take a single wound against Hurricane Bolter. The Death Company Dread, so it's basically exactly the same, however he gets a Feel No Pain. So while you would take those 13 wounds, your 6 plus Feel No Pain would let you save 2, so he would still die against the multi-meltas. The Storm Cannon, you would take the 6, because it's 6 wounds, you would essentially roll 6 Feel No Pain, so the 1 in 6 chance. You would take 5 wounds. Against the Grav Cannons, again, we're rounding up because we can't round like a half a dice roll, so he would save and go down to 3 wounds. And against the Bolters, there would really be no change unless you lucked out and rolled the 6, and then potentially you would take no damage from the Bolters. And then Librarian Dread. So I've looked at the Librarian Dread because he's essentially the same as the Furioso, but he can put that Psychic Fortress bubble up. So if he gets the Psychic Fortress bubble up before he's hit by 10 multi-melta shots, then averages say he would only take 7.5 damage and he would survive because he would get wounded 5 times and he would potentially save twice with this 5+ bubble. So he would take 3 wounds of 2.5 damage a time. He could survive the 10 multi-melta shots, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you're going to need to get a little bit of luck, but I think this is the only one that you've got a chance. I think the other ones, there's no chance, right? They're just dead. The Storm Cannon, it makes no difference. The -2 still saves on his normal save because he's a 3+, so he'd still take the 6 wounds. The Grav Cannon, he would actually get to save a little bit more because it's normally -3 and it would be a 6+, so the Psychic Fortress would give him a 5+, so he'd only take 3 damage from the Grav Cannons, and then he'd only take 1 from the Bolters, same as everybody else, because Duty Eternal doesn't kick in. So, if we're getting shot, ignore these last 2 columns for a second and I'll tell you what they are after. So Furioso, Death Company, Librarian, they're all going to die against the multi-meltas. The Death Company is the strongest just because of that Feel No Pain. He'll survive a little bit better than the other ones. However, if our Librarian gets his 5+ up, then he potentially survives the multi-melta. I've said this is good because I guess this is dead, so that's not good. And the Storm Cannon, there's no difference. The Grav Cannon, he actually then equals the Death Company, and the Bolters, no difference. However, the last option would be is if we gave this Warlord a trait or Hero of the Chapter and gave him Iron Resolve. So that would give him 1 extra wound and a 6+ Feel No Pain. So essentially, against the 10 multi-meltas, you potentially now would go down to 6 wounds. You'd get a couple of 6s if you had to roll 7 or 8 dice, right? So he survives against the multi-melta. Against the Storm Cannons, he becomes exactly the same as the Death Company Dread. He gets that 1 extra save. Against the 20 Grav Cannons, he actually, again, it has to be rounded some way. It's exactly 2.5. So I've said that he would potentially save 1 more. So he becomes the strongest against the grav cannons, and against the bolters, again, he would take 1 wound. I guess if you lucked out with a 6, he potentially takes nothing. So the Librarian Dread, with his bubble, with Iron Resolve, is actually kind of strong at surviving. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the dice rolls, but the averages say here that you could survive 10 multi-melta shots, and you could survive it with 2 wounds left. Or, sorry, Iron Resolve gives you +1 wounds, so it would actually be 3 wounds left. So that's sort of interesting. So if we look at overall performance, survivability against the low damage, they all do the fine. Survivability against high damage, the Death Company Dread is definitely on top. However, if we have this Librarian buffed with the Warlord trait, with the Psychic Bubble, it basically becomes a 2. I mean, technically that becomes a 1. It was a little bit stronger than the Death Company Dread. Damage against weak enemies, they're all kind of... The Death Company is the best option because he has the most attacks and he can carry the Heavy Flamer. The Furioso is not far behind with his frag cannon. I guess maybe this Librarian Dread is the worst, but if you do end up charging into close combat with an infantry squad, I mean, he still has a lot of attacks. He's still going to wound pretty much everything on 2s, so that's why these are both 3s, because he basically has more attacks, and once those attacks hit, they're going to kill stuff. And then again, if we buff him, he potentially becomes as good as the Death Company Dreadnought. And then damage against strong enemies, the Death Company Dreadnought is definitely the winner, having the most attacks and the most strength 10 hits with rerolls to wounds. However, the Librarian Dreadnought can be buffed pretty insanely, in that his claw will be strength 14, his halberd would be strength 9, and he would have, 9 attacks, so he can really hold his own. And I guess these are 155 points, right? It costs no more points to make him a warlord or to take the correct psychic powers. It's going to cost you some CP, and then obviously you need to sort of spec for that. So that's my overall summary of how these guys do. In terms of shooting, I haven't really dived into the shooting too much. The really only change is that Furioso frag cannon, and I guess you guys really need to try it. I mean, it's just going to be a few hits and it's only going to be -1. I can only really see it killing 1 or 2 guys a turn. Like, I don't think it's going to be any stronger than a Heavy Flamer. I mean, at that point, would you better just take the claws and take the Heavy Flamer and focus them on melee? You might be able to. But the Furioso is definitely the loser here. And I think he's going to be very situational. The Death Company Dreadnought overall seems okay. And then the Librarian Dreadnought is, to me, I think it's the definite winner. And I think it definitely has the options, right? In that we can change what it's equipped with, or what psychic powers it's got, or what warlord it's got, to really just give it an edge and make it kind of a scary enemy to fight. Alright, so if we look at the conclusion, I think when I was making this, the thing that really surprised me is just how bad these guys are against infantry, right? Like, we just have so many better options now against infantry, like Lightning Claws Vanguard Vets, Assault Intercessors, regular Death Company guy, Lightning Claw Terminators. Like, I think if you want to kill infantry, you don't want to pick any of these dreadnoughts. They aren't going to do nearly as well as those other guys for the equivalent points. I think against armour is really where these guys excel. I think we're only talking about the Death Company and the Librarian Dreadnought, and I think all the options that Librarian Dreadnought gets really gives him an edge. If you can afford the HQ, then I think right now this is a good time to be able to pick that Librarian Dreadnought up. So with the new Duty Eternal rule, I think these guys are going to be quite strong. They can definitely survive reasonably well and take a punch. However, their lack of invulnerable save, I think, is their one big weakness. So I think that the Psychic Fortress, and then I guess Shield of Sanguinius, if we get that power back, sort of give the Librarian Dreadnought the edge to really be the best option for us in terms of dreadnoughts. The fact he can be protected with Lookout Sir rule could even mean that maybe like some sort of drop pod shenanigans could go on, or a Storm Raven with the Dreadnought and some other infantry could be used. But I think for me, I'm going to be looking at either maybe strategic reserves and or just, depending on the battlefield, getting him across into the enemy lines as quickly as possible. So I'm definitely going to run a Warlord trait on the Librarian Dreadnought. I'm thinking that Iron Resolve seems very attractive. If he could be protected with Lookout Sir, and we also have Death and Duty Ends, he's always going to be able to do damage, and he's also going to be quite survivable. As much as I want to do a little bit extra damage, I think maybe keeping him alive for one extra turn or two with Iron Resolve might be the correct play. I am typically running Dante in my army, so I guess if Dante was close to him, then he could give him his Chapter Master buff, and at that point, if he is buffed to about 9 attacks, and he does get to reroll everything in terms of hits, then that's going to be phenomenally strong, and I guess whatever enemy unit is in combat with him is going to be in an absolute world of pain. So there's an absolute heap of data in this video, and I think maybe I lost my way a couple of times, but I hope I managed to get it all clear and across. And then I think the important thing is that we will revisit these dreadnoughts when our supplement comes out in December, and at that point we'll try and focus much more in maybe on one at a time with all the new rules and all the changes. I think the Librarian Dreadnought really stands apart from the other two, so I could see a comparison between the other two and then the Librarian coming in separately. There's just so many options for the Librarian, it kind of I guess confused everything a little bit in this video, but please leave me a comment below, tell me what Dreadnought you're going to run and tell me why. And then also, if you are thinking about like some of these Librarian options and the Space Marine psychic powers that I've talked about, also leave comments down below on them, because as I say, like, I'm not seeing huge value in the Space Marine powers, so I'd like to know what other people are finding the most success with, and then I'll use that for like future discussions. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with me this week, and I hope this video helps you delve into some of all the changes around the dreadnoughts and maybe helps you pick which one you're going to use next, or makes you think of some options that you hadn't thought of before. I'd love to see some army list submissions that include these dreadnoughts. You can submit a list over in the discussion tab, and then we'll bring them up every Sunday on the live stream to have a chat about them, and really want to get the most out of every single list that we get submitted. Last week we actually hit a peak of 40 people in the live chat, which was very cool, and I guess as we're diving into all the different rules, and especially over the next month as new Blood Angels units potentially come out and a new codex comes out, I guess there's going to be tons of options that we need to discuss. So really looking forward to going on this journey. It's a very exciting time, and thank you again for taking the time out of your busy week, I'm sure, to spend some of it with me. I really hope that we'll see you in the next video. Until next time, by the blood are we made. Peace.